Sometimes the most confusing moments in a connection happen right after things start feeling real. Not at the beginning, not during the early excitement, but at the moment when closeness quietly begins to grow. Because that's often when something unexpected happens. He comes closer, and then suddenly pulls away. Not in a dramatic way. There's no argument, no clear explanation, just a subtle shift. Messages become shorter. Replies take longer. Conversations that once flowed easily begin to feel slightly distant. And when that happens, the mind immediately starts searching for answers. What changed? Because just days earlier, everything felt different. There was warmth, curiosity, a sense that the connection was becoming deeper than before. Maybe he started opening up more. Maybe he shared something personal. Maybe there was a moment where he looked at you in a way that felt sincere. The kind of moment where you suddenly realize something real might be forming between two people. Those moments can feel powerful, because emotional closeness creates something rare, a feeling of being understood, seen, accepted. And when two people experience that at the same time, the connection can suddenly deepen very quickly. But sometimes that exact moment, the moment where things begin to feel real, is also the moment where uncertainty appears. Not necessarily for both people, but for one of them, because closeness changes the emotional landscape of a relationship. In the beginning, everything is light, playful, exploratory. There's curiosity and attraction, but very little emotional risk. If things don't work out, life simply moves on. But once real feelings start forming, something else enters the picture. Vulnerability. The awareness that this connection now matters. And when something matters, it suddenly has the power to hurt. For people who are comfortable with emotional closeness, that vulnerability can feel natural. It can even feel exciting. But for someone who isn't used to depending on others emotionally, that realization can feel overwhelming. Not dramatic, not frightening in an obvious way, just uncomfortable enough to create hesitation. And hesitation often looks like distance. From the outside, that distance can feel confusing. Because the same person who begins pulling away is often the one who created the closeness in the first place. The one who initiated deeper conversations. The one who shared personal stories. The one who made the connection feel meaningful, which makes the shift feel almost contradictory. But internally, it may not feel like contradiction at all. It may feel like self-protection. When emotions begin growing faster than someone expects, their instinct may be to slow everything down, to regain emotional balance, to create a little space between themselves and feelings they aren't sure how to handle yet. This doesn't always happen consciously. In for distance, they just notice something inside them shifting. A quiet voice that says,
"Slow down, step back, don't go too deep too quickly."
And that internal response can change behavior in subtle ways. Communication becomes less frequent. Emotional openness becomes slightly guarded. Moments of silence start appearing where warmth used to exist. To the person experiencing that shift, it may simply feel like taking a breath. But to the person on the other side, it can feel like confusion. Because the connection that once felt natural now feels uncertain. And uncertainty makes the mind restless. People replay conversations. They search for clues. They try to identify the exact moment when things changed. Was it something I said? Was it something I did? Did the connection mean something different to him than it meant to me? These questions are common when someone pulls away after getting close. But sometimes the real answer isn't hidden in something that went wrong. Sometimes the answer is simply that the connection became real enough to activate someone's emotional defenses. For many people, emotional closeness feels like something to move toward. But for others, closeness can activate a completely different response. Because intimacy creates exposure. It makes emotions visible, needs visible, fears visible. And when someone has spent years learning to rely mostly on themselves, that kind of exposure can feel unfamiliar, even threatening. Not because the other person is unsafe, but because emotional dependence itself feels risky. So when a connection suddenly begins to deepen, something inside them instinctively searches for safety. And sometimes safety looks like distance. Distance creates space. Space creates calm. And calm allows someone to regain control over emotions that suddenly felt stronger than expected. This is why pulling away doesn't always mean losing interest. Sometimes it means the opposite. Sometimes it means the connection became strong enough to trigger old protective patterns. Patterns built from past experiences, past disappointments, past moments where closeness ended in pain. When those experiences shape someone's emotional habits, they often learn to manage relationships carefully. Stay kind. Stay warm. Stay connected, but avoid going too deep too quickly. So when a relationship suddenly begins crossing into deeper emotional territory, their instinct may be to slow things down, to re-establish emotional distance before the feelings grow stronger. From the outside, that behavior can look like withdrawal, but internally, it can feel more like self-regulation. A way to prevent emotions from becoming overwhelming. The difficulty is that this process rarely comes with clear explanations. Most people aren't fully aware of these patterns while they're happening. They just notice a feeling of pressure, a need for space, a sense that things are moving faster than they're comfortable with. And instead of explaining that confusion out loud, they simply create distance, which leaves the other person trying to understand what changed. But sometimes nothing actually changed in the connection itself. What changed was the emotional meaning of the connection. Because once closeness becomes real, it carries weight. And weight creates responsibility. Responsibility for someone else's feelings. Responsibility for emotional presence. Responsibility for the possibility that this relationship might grow into something significant. For someone who isn't used to that level of emotional involvement, that responsibility can feel heavy. So stepping back becomes a way to lighten that weight. Not permanently. Not always intentionally, just enough to restore a sense of control. And that's why pulling away after getting close can feel so confusing. Because the person creating distance may still feel the connection. They may still think about the moments you shared. They may still remember the comfort they felt around you. But instead of moving toward those feelings, they create a little space from them, trying to understand them, trying to slow them down, trying to regain emotional balance. From your side, though, that space can feel like disappearance. Because you experienced the closeness. You saw the openness. You felt the moment where something real started forming. And then you watched the distance appear afterward. Which leaves one quiet question. If the connection felt real, why did he pull away? Sometimes the answer isn't that the connection was weak. Sometimes the answer is that the connection was strong enough to change something inside him. Strong enough to make vulnerability visible. Strong enough to challenge emotional habits he had relied on for years. And when that happens, distance can feel like the safest response. Not because the connection meant nothing, but because it meant enough to feel dangerous, enough to trigger old defenses, enough to make someone pause and ask themselves if they're ready for something deeper. And sometimes that pause looks exactly like someone coming close, and then quietly pulling away.